Hey there, my name's Jackson Gregory. I'm one of the agronomists at Belgrade Co-op in Belgrade, Minnesota. Today I'm out in a soybean field. We're going to talk a little bit about white mold and how it affects you. A lot of you might be thinking, it's June, end of June, why are we talking about white mold now? I don't usually see it in my fields until August or September. Well, that's part of the reason we're here today, is that a lot of the control factors that you have to do, we're going to have to get pushed into this next week or 2 weeks here. So we'll talk a little bit about why that is and what the white mold fungus is and how it's affecting our beans. So if you think back to your 10th grade biology class, a lot of you might remember the disease triangle. So there's 3 factors that all have to come together properly to make a disease happen and actually show up in the field. So the first factor of the disease triangle is your pathogen. So the pathogen we're talking about today is white mold. Now, if you've ever combined a soybean field that have had white mold in it, you'll know exactly what this is. It's those little black sclerotia bodies you see in your combine tank when you're unloading, or you see it in there all the time. It's all over. So if you've combined a field with white mold in it, you know darn well that there's plenty of that pathogen in your field because you combined a bunch of it up, and a lot of it got spread out the back of your combine. So you're spreading that pathogen all over the field. So the university will say that those sclerotia bodies, those little black, they look almost like rat turds, they'll shoot spores up all summer long. They don't have a temperature gradient like weed seeds do or like insects do. They pretty much, as soon as it gets nice out, they start shooting spores up pretty much the whole summer long. That's according to university studies. So that being said, there are other parts of the disease triangle need to come into play for us to actually see the disease show up in the field. So the next part is the soybean. That's the host. That's the other factor of the disease triangle. So soybean plant is one of the hosts. There's a couple others, but the main one we're talking about today is soybeans. But more in particular is the soybean blossom. That's the only spot that the spore can hit and actually shoot and cause the disease to happen. It is only on the soybean blossom, which is why we're out here today talking about it and not in August or September, because we're starting to see blossoms now. A lot of you know that June 21st is the summer solstice. So on the summer solstice is when those flowers, when the soybean plant gets that trigger that says, hey, you can now start flowering. And our relative maturity of the soybean plant makes it how many days after that summer solstice we start seeing flowers. The environment plays a little role too, but the main factor is that summer solstice. And we are starting to see flowers now. If I'm looking, about most of these soybean plants are starting to get flowers on them now. So we're seeing a fair amount of them out here. So that is a trigger that tells me, okay, we need to really start thinking about what we're going to do to try to protect these plants from white mold. The last factor is going to be your environment. So that's the trap a lot of us fall into, because we say, okay, we're looking at these soybean fields, they're not anywhere close to canopy. This field actually looks nicer than a lot of them, but it's still, not anywhere close to canopy on these 30-inch rows. So a lot of guys are saying, oh, it's been a little dry this year, the beans are shorter than I'd like them to be. Do I really need to worry about white mold? Well, if you remember last year, the beans were even shorter than this time of year, and guess what? We had white mold problems last year. So unless you can predict the next couple months of weather, I'm going to say if you have high-risk fields or have seen it in some fields, you need to do some kind of a white mold treatment if you don't want to get white mold this year. So that's going to be what we talk about next. So the environment they like is a tight canopy and wet conditions. Again, it's been a little dry, but unless you can tell me how July is going to be, August is going to be, we need to do some kind of an application to prevent your high-risk fields from white mold. So what are those applications that we can do? So a couple of the ideas, you should have probably done something already. Those ideas would be the right variety selection. Did you talk with your agronomist or with your seed salesman about the white mold susceptibility of your soybean variety? The other thing would be row spacing. So these soybeans happen to be on 30-inch rows. That's the best we can do for white mold. Once you start tightening those rows up, the canopy closes faster. We get white mold more severely in drilled rows or 22-inch rows, even over 30-inch rows. So those are some of the things you could have done before the season. But we're standing here in a soybean field that's been planted. We selected the variety, everything else already. what can we do from here on out? So that's what we're going to talk about now. So we have two different options. So the first option would be kind of your cheaper option. That'd be a product like Cobra. So this is actually a herbicide product. This product is actually causing what the university and what the label says is a systemic acquired resistance to white mold. So now I'm not going to get into what that exactly means. You can kind of look that up on your own because it's a pretty complicated experience in the plant, but it's pretty well known occurrence across a lot of different factors, not just white mold, not just soybeans. Systemic acquired resistance is a pretty common thing in plants naturally. And with Cobra, we can actually make the plants have that. And I'm going to say suppress white mold. I'm never going to say prevent white mold because we're still going to get some of it. It's almost impossible to prevent white mold, but we're going to suppress it and we're going to gain a lot of yield by doing that. So this would be what I would consider the cheaper option. It's also going to burn your beans, however, just like a burning herbicide would. So that's something you got to think about when you're doing these applications. If you really hate seeing burned beans, then we're going to have to think about doing the other application. But if you don't mind burned beans, and I personally don't, I think they grow out of it just fine. We're starting to get some rains now. I'm not worried about it. So to me, this is a good option if you're, a little more concerned on the price, not so concerned on the actual bean burning. It's a good option. So the timing for this Cobra application would be within the next week. I want to get a lot of my applications are going on tomorrow, going on the next day, going on before Saturday. I'm getting a lot of my applications on. Beginning of next week would be fine too for this Cobra, but now that we're seeing flowers, we want to get this on as fast as possible. So that's the first option for suppression of white mold this time of year is Cobra. I would get it on before July 1st. Make sure you get it on before July 1st, next week and a half. That's when I'm putting this on. The next option is actually a true fungicide. So this one is Endura. This is the best fungicide we have for white mold. To me, I wouldn't waste my time on any other fungicide. If you're gonna go the fungicide route on white mold, I wouldn't waste my time on any other fungicide. I'd pretty much only use Endura. It's the one that's been proven almost every time you put it on. If white mold shows up in that field, you're getting a good response out of it. You're seeing a lot greener beans, a lot less dead beans. It's doing a heck of a lot better job than any other fungicide. So if you're looking at a fungicide application, I'd make sure you're using Endura. So this is the option that's actually protecting those blossoms from getting the spores on them and from getting the spores to infect the plant. So the timing for this guy, because your blossoms are starting at the bottom of the plant and moving up, those spores, when they germinate, can only go about 4 inches or so above the soil surface where they sprouted from. So I actually want to wait a little bit on Endura application on the timing of it. I want to actually give it probably a week to 2.5 weeks maybe before I'm putting this on. I want to see a few more blossoms on that bottom of that plant because we don't quite have the right environment for white mold yet, but I want to protect as many blossoms as possible. Unlike Cobra, this is not a systemic thing. This is something that only the blossoms that the fungicide touches are we getting protection on. It's not systemic. So I want to see as many of those lower blossoms on as possible before I spray this, as long as we're a little ways out from canopy yet. If you're at canopy, if you have drilled beans and you're about at canopy, I would get this sprayed on now. But if you look at these, we're about a foot or so away from canopy yet. I'm going to want to get this on probably in two weeks or so on this particular field because before canopy we're not going to get a lot of the problems with white mold yet. But again, if you have drilled beans, you're looking to get this on about as soon as possible because you're probably closer to canopy than we are here on these 30-inch rows. So again, drilled beans at canopy within the next week, 30-inch rows about a foot or so away from canopy, probably 2 weeks. So all we're trying to do with this Endura is get as much of the blossoms on the lower part of the plant, so lower 5-6 inches on the plant, we're looking to get protected with this Endura. So we have a little bit more time with this compared to the Cobra. So that's kind of the two applications you can use. When you're talking about Endura, you're going to want to use some kind of surfactant to make sure we're getting that fungicide in the plant. What I would use is a product called Master Lock. So that's actually a drift control agent plus an NIS, a non-ionic surfactant. It's making sure you're getting that fungicide into the canopy. It's making sure you get good coverage, and the coverage you're getting is getting into the blossoms there. So you're going to want to make sure you use a product like Master Lock. So the rate you'd use with Endura would be 8 ounces with 6 ounces of Master Lock. The rate you would use with Cobra is going to be 6 ounces of Cobra with 6 ounces of Destiny, which is methylated seed oil, and then 4 ounces of Interlock to make sure we're getting good canopy penetration with Interlock. So those are the rates, and those are the kind of the timings of the 2 applications that we would like to see get put on for white mold. So that being said, give a call to any of your agronomists that you're working with Belgrade Co-op. We can help you out with any of that information that you need, a little more broke down or anything else. And let's get some white mold fungicide or herbicide put on.